of shadows.
Hi my angels, it's Hailey Reese and welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am so grateful that you are here and I hope that you are having an absolutely magical morning, afternoon, or night, whatever it is for you when this video finally reaches you. Today's video is definitely a dark and heavy one. This case is not only sad, but is deeply disturbing, not only for the victim and the family of the victims, but for those who would fall victim to the aftermath of this entire case. It is what nightmares are made of, and I am so curious to hear all of your guys' thoughts and opinions on this case, as I know there is going to be a ton to talk about. There's going to be some controversy as far as law enforcement goes, and just talk about the case overall, because as I said, this is one of those cases that you don't believe to be real until you dig deeper. And what is even more astonishing about this case in general is that it seems as though it would be a one-off case. It seems like it would be one of those cases that you would hear about and you're like, oh my God, how did this ever happen? But the more that I dug into this case and cases of this nature, I was absolutely stunned to realize that this has not only happened numerous times before, but will likely, and hopefully not, but will likely, statistically, happen again at some point or another, which is even more deeply unsettling. So definitely curious to hear all of your guys' thoughts and opinions for sure. As I said, I feel as though you're going to have plenty of them, because as much as I've dove into this case and cases of this sorts, I still have a million thoughts, a million questions, a million what ifs. Like, there's a lot that is going through my mind, as I explore this case. So definitely a devastating but interesting one, and I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions. But before we get into today's video, I am so grateful to thank today's video sponsor, Wonder. Wonder is an app that turns words into digital artwork. I think it's honestly so cool and amazing to see your words and ideas turn into amazing digital artwork and your creativity come to life. With Wonder, all you have to do is pick an adjective, subject, situation, style, and then create. So whether you're looking to bring an idea to life, just create, or find some inspiration, Wonder is definitely the app for you. Personally, I think Wonder is a lot of fun no matter what it is that you want to use it for, though. I've definitely had some inspiring moments with it, but I will be honest, there have been some nights that Tyler and I have searched some pretty crazy, creepy things on there, and it's just been so fun to see what the results are. So no matter what it is, I truly think you guys will have so much fun, and I don't know, I just think it's an amazing creative app. Make sure to click the link at the very top of my description and you will get a free premium trial, which is absolutely incredible. There are 20 more styles, it is much faster, there's unlimited artwork, and there's no ads. So I definitely think it is worth it to check it out. Make sure to click the link at the very top of my description, and thank you so much to Wonder for sponsoring today's video. But without further ado, let's get into this case. So James and Rhonda Sargent checked into room 222 at the Budget Lodge Inn in Memphis, Tennessee on January 29th, 2010. Just 2 days after 28-year-old Sony Millbrook was reported missing on January 27th. Now, Sony was described as a very loving, devoted mother. She had 5 children, 4 of which were with a man named Lakeith Moody. Now, Lakeith Moody and her had a very abusive relationship. It was not a healthy relationship whatsoever. Cases like this especially hurt my heart because, as I'm sure many of you who have been on my channel for a while would know, growing up, my mom was in an extremely abusive relationship, and witnessing it as a child and knowing her worth and what a human life is worth in general, no matter who it is, it's just heartbreaking to dive into cases like this, and I do want to emphasize that. I will have some resources linked also in my description box for anybody who may be experiencing domestic violence or abusive relationships, or maybe you know someone who is. I will link any resources that I think could be helpful, because I do want to emphasize that before continuing in on this case. It was known to those who loved her and will continue to love her that this relationship was not healthy. They would often describe her having bruises on her body, and just there was a lot more going on prior to all of this. But she was a beautiful mother of 5 and a loving mother of 5 who was reported missing actually after not picking up her children from daycare and school, which was completely out of the ordinary for her. Now, Sony had been staying in room 222 at this exact hotel with Lakeith, even though she shouldn't have been. Now, I say shouldn't have been solely because at this given point in time, she did have a protection order against him. And as I mentioned, their relationship was just really unhealthy. For an example, when they had first checked into the motel, staff was called to their room because they were having a really loud disagreement, argument. It was going downhill and really dark and dangerous really quickly. But I also do want to note, despite that order against him, and despite the fact that she shouldn't have been with him in that motel room for that reason, as I said, I've witnessed what it's like to be in abusive relationships, and it is so dark and dangerous and hard to get out of. So again, breaks my heart, but let's continue on. So as I mentioned, she would be reported missing after not turning up to pick her children up from daycare/school. And after this, the motel staff would pack up the entire motel room that was still fully full of their stuff due to lack of payment. They would pack it all up, clean the room, and put the room back up for availability, which is where James and Rhonda Sargent come into this story. The room had been previously cleaned up from Sony and her family, and now James and Rhonda were occupying this room. But the moment that they entered the room, despite the room looking clean, there was something about the room that they just could not get past. And that was the stench and smell within this motel room. They said the smell was so awful that no matter what they did to try to mask the smell, it would not go away. They were burning incense. They'd even noticed that people had stuck certain, what's the word I'm looking for? Fabric softener sheets in various areas throughout the room, as if they also had recognized that the room smelt, but it wasn't masking any bit of the smell. So obviously they're going to complain to the motel staff. Now, they went to the motel staff and told them that their room smelled horrible. In fact, using the words stanky and foul. But nothing was being done by the motel staff. They just kind of disregarded the claims that the room was as awful as it was. But even more disturbing was that the two had realized that the stench was the worst when they would be sitting on top of the bed. So when they would sit on the bed, they would really recognize that smell. And I mean, nothing is worse when you're already traveling away from home. You want somewhere safe, warm, and cozy to curl up, and it just stinks and is not the vibe that you wanted. But there was nothing being done about it. Now, here's something that I do need to note, though, because this is so vital in this case, and so this is where the controversy truly comes in as far as the investigation goes in this particular case. But detectives from the Memphis Police Department's Missing Persons Unit had visited the motel on January 29, but they had failed to enter room 222. They never went in and checked to see what the situation was in the room that Sony had last been seen in. Now, one of the key reasons that I've read as to why this was the case was because By the time they had went and it was becoming like a homicide investigation, the room had already been completely packed up, completely cleaned, and the cleaning staff had stated there was no signs of any foul play or anything out of the ordinary. So they just assumed that they should put their efforts elsewhere and not look within said room. But as I mentioned, keep that in mind because that is such a controversial and heavy subject when it comes to this case in particular, and rightfully so, but we will get there. Now, James and Rhonda would actually leave the Budget Lodge Inn for an entire week because of how awful their experience was there. Their room smelled absolutely terrible and no one was really helping them. So they did want to leave, but would eventually end up back there because it was just the more affordable option for them and was where they had ended up once again. But this time again, they still at one point in time would end up back in room 222. The most astonishing part is that over the span of 6 weeks, this particular room, room 222, had been rented out to guests at this motel 5 times. So on 5 separate occasions, this room had been rented out. And yet the smell is getting increasingly worse and worse. Even James and Rhonda said when they had returned the second time around, they still had those like fabric softener, like everything was showing that people knew there was a stench in the room, but yet it seemed as though no one was doing anything. And this again is also controversial because later on they would say that they were investigating it. But guests of the motel would say that that was a lie because they had told them on multiple occasions how awful the stench was, and yet nobody seemed to be doing enough, which is heartbreaking. Like in the grand scheme of all of this, it is so disturbing and heartbreaking. Yeah. The police were then called on March 15th when employees finally further investigated room 222 and made a deeply disturbing and shocking, heartbreaking discovery. The employees had finally lifted the bed and would find where the stench had been coming from all along. I hate even saying stench, by the way, because this is a human being. This is a 28-year-old woman who is and was loved, and I feel terrible saying stench, but when you read through what people were experiencing, like essentially that's what people were describing their experience to be. It is not a depiction or a description of the victim, who ultimately and of course deserved so much better and is so much more than a stench. I hate that I always feel the need to over-explain myself, but I do want to emphasize on that because it doesn't even feel right coming out of my mouth, but it is what I was reading online. Sony's body was in fact underneath the king-size mattress and box spring, and she had been brutally murdered. Sony had been strangled to death with a cable wire and disposed of underneath the mattress of the bed. Now, Lakeith Moody had disappeared exactly when Sony had disappeared, but he was eventually located and arrested on completely separate charges initially. He would, however, be charged with murder in the first degree and after a very short trial, sentenced to life in prison in February of 2014. Now, I'm sure you're wondering what a lot of people have wondered and will wonder when looking into and learning about this case, and that is, where were the police in this? Why did they not investigate room 222 deeper? How did this go unnoticed for 6 weeks by law enforcement? And they did launch an internal investigation with this. The Memphis Police Department would launch an internal investigation that would lead to the conclusion that this was not properly investigated. Room 222 was not properly investigated following Sony's disappearance. But unfortunately, in the end, this would only lead to the charges being dropped against one Memphis police officer and a 4-day suspension for the other, which many believe is just not enough. Now, this is where like my emotions come into cases like this, where I kind of become myself in looking into this. And I imagine what it would be like if this was someone that I loved and my family member, and would it have been enough? And I mean, with anything in life, when you lose someone you love, it's never enough. Like, nothing is ever enough, and I know that. But my heart absolutely aches for the family of Sony, because it's like they were begging law enforcement to let them in that room. They felt as though they could find something that would lead them to where she could be, where she was, what happened to her. And that wasn't allowed. Instead, the room was cleaned and other people were allowed to stay in it. And I just think it is so heartbreaking and disturbing, not only to those who stayed in the room, 5 separate bookings of that room, where they were sleeping on top of a deceased mother of 5, which is disturbing in and of itself, but to the family members whose loved one was underneath these people when they just so desperately wanted to know where she was and what had happened to her. I don't believe they did enough, in my personal opinion. Obviously, I don't work for law enforcement. I wasn't a part of the investigation. I don't know the ins and outs of it, but to me, it just feels as though if that was the last place that this woman was seen, why wouldn't it have been searched deeper? I don't know. But the fact that, like I said, it was just cleaned, nobody knew, there was this smell they were trying to mask, and it was a woman who deserved to be put to rest and whose loved ones deserved that closure. Like, what a deeply disturbing case. I believe I watched in a video somewhere or read online somewhere that Sony's parents took custody of her 4 youngest children, and that her oldest child is living on their own, which at least the children have family to rely on. From what I read, Sony's family has deeply struggled with this, and from what I was reading from the time, they had no idea how they would ever get over it. And I mean, I would feel the exact same way. I pray for peace and to just send so much love and light to that family. But what a messed up case. Like, and what's even crazier, you guys, is this is not a one-off. This is not the first time that this has happened, where there has been a body underneath a motel or hotel bed, and people, not just like on one-off occasion, people have been sleeping on top of said body. There was another case in Mexico City that also just absolutely gives me goosebumps, and it's just awful. A couple was staying at the Hotel Senador in Mexico City when they too smelled a foul smell in their hotel room and began to complain about this smell. Again, hotel staff was kind of like blowing it off a little bit. The couple continued to complain, but after the couple had left, after a week, once again, the staff was like, hey, hold on a second, this smell is actually a lot. Maybe we should look a little bit deeper into this smell. It was then when 2 cleaning ladies lifted up the bed again and found the body of a woman believed to be between the age of 25 to 30. And even worse, it was confirmed by a hotel representative that multiple people had checked into this room and had slept with said dead body underneath the mattress. Cases like this just absolutely blow my mind, because on one hand, I can look at the people who had checked in's point of view and be like, oh my gosh, ew, like, who wants to sleep on top of somebody who is deceased underneath them and smell them? But on the other hand, I feel awful to even say that, because like I said, this is somebody's loved one. Like, the whole case is just so mind-blowing, and as I said, my heart just goes out to everybody involved, and I truly have no words for the entire situation, other than I believe maybe there should have been some more repercussions for how law enforcement handled investigating that room. But I would love to know your guys' thoughts and theories on how law enforcement handled investigating room 222. As I said, my heart goes out to Sony's family and children. I pray that I'm just praying for you. And that is it for today's video. As mentioned, I would love to know your thoughts and theories. As for me, I feel as though anytime I check into a hotel or a motel at any given point in time going forward, I will be checking the bed every single time, whether I smell anything or not. But I would love to know your guys' thoughts and theories. Once again, I would absolutely love to thank Wonder for sponsoring today's video. As I mentioned, I will have a link at the very top of my description. Make sure to click that link and you'll get a free trial of the premium version. It is truly so much fun, so I hope that you guys enjoy it as much as I do, and thank you so much to Wonder for sponsoring. If you guys are new to my channel or you are just not yet subscribed but you enjoy my content, I would love it if you go ahead and click that subscribe button, and please give this video a big thumbs up if you did enjoy it. Remember, my love, is to do all things with kindness, and until next time, I love you.